The phone rang early one morning, a call that would change everything. David Turner, a man who had always prided himself on his relationship with his children, sat at his kitchen table, staring at the caller ID. It was his daughter, Sarah. He hadn't heard from her in weeks, and their last conversation had been strained at best. She had moved to a new city, started a new job, and he was proud of her, of course, but something about the distance between them felt different. If you're enjoying the story so far, don't forget to subscribe to True Family Revenge Stories and hit the bell icon to stay updated on all our latest videos. We've got more twists and turns coming your way. Don't miss out. He answered the phone, and before he could even say a word, Sarah's voice came through, shaky but firm. "Dad, I have something important to tell you." David's heart skipped a beat. The words echoed in his mind as he tried to steady his breathing. He had no idea what was coming, but he could feel the weight in her tone. Sarah had always been the one to wear her heart on her sleeve, so hearing her sound so distant, so cold, it unsettled him. "What is it, Sarah? What's going on?" he asked, trying to keep the panic in his voice under control. "I'm married," she said simply. David blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. "Married? What do you mean, married?" His mind raced. The last time they had spoken, there had been no mention of a relationship, let alone a wedding. They had always been close, and he thought he knew everything about her. What was going on? "I got married a few weeks ago. I didn't tell you because I wanted it to be private, just the two of us." "I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't know how to tell you." David's chest tightened as the words sank in. He felt an overwhelming sense of betrayal, but he couldn't quite put his finger on why. It wasn't that he didn't approve of her getting married, it was the secrecy of it all. The fact that Sarah, his little girl, had taken such a huge step without even telling him. The father in him felt both hurt and confused, but he tried to keep his voice steady. "Why didn't you tell me? Why the secrecy? I thought we were close. I thought you could trust me with something as big as this." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. David could hear the faint sound of Sarah's breathing before she spoke again. I didn't know how to tell you, Dad. I didn't want you to feel hurt or left out." David's anger, mixed with confusion, began to bubble up. The more he thought about it, the more it didn't make sense. Sarah, his daughter, had always been open with him. So why this time? Why had she chosen to keep such a monumental event from him? He could feel the sting of rejection, but he pushed it aside. "Sarah, you know I would never judge you. I just don't understand why you wouldn't tell me about your wedding. You're my daughter. I should have been there for you." "I'm sorry, Dad," Sarah whispered. "I know I should have told you. But there's something else." David's stomach tightened. "What is it, sweetheart?" He braced himself, sensing there was more to this story than she was letting on. "I need to ask you for a favor," she continued, her voice more hesitant now. "It's about the cabin. My husband and I are planning our honeymoon, and we were wondering if we could use the mountain cabin, the one you've always talked about. The one by the lake. I know it means a lot to you, but we really need it." David was taken aback. His mind struggled to process her words. The cabin. It was the one thing he had always promised himself. He would leave it to his children one day. It was a family heirloom, something he had built with his own hands, and something he had always planned to pass down to them when the time was right. The idea of his daughter, who had just married in secret, asking to use the cabin felt wrong. "You want to use the cabin?" he repeated, disbelief clear in his voice. "Sarah, that's not just any cabin. It's my legacy. I've always planned on passing it down to you one day, but this is too much. You just got married, and you want to take my cabin for your honeymoon." David felt his emotions teetering on the edge of anger and hurt. The cabin had always been a place of peace for him. A place to escape the chaos of the world and retreat into solitude. It was something he had worked tirelessly to preserve, and the thought of it being used by someone who had excluded him from such an important moment in her life was difficult to accept. "I know it's a lot to ask, Dad," Sarah said, her voice now pleading. "But we're really trying to start our life together, and this cabin would mean so much to us. Please. You've always said how much you wanted us to have it one day. Well, I need it now." David sat in stunned silence. The nerve of her. His own daughter, who couldn't even bother to invite him to her wedding, now wanted to take his most treasured possession. His heart ached, his mind racing. It wasn't just about the cabin, it was about respect, about the trust they had always shared, now shattered. He cleared his throat, trying to keep his emotions in check. "I don't know, Sarah. I think you need to reconsider. You can't just expect me to hand over something so important to you after everything that's happened. You didn't even tell me about your wedding." "I'm sorry, Dad," she said softly. "I know I should have told you. I was wrong. But please, can you at least consider it? This is important to me. It's the only way we can start our new life together." David closed his eyes, trying to calm the storm raging inside him. He had always done his best for his children. He had worked hard to give them everything they needed, and he had always been there for them. But now, it felt like his daughter was asking for something far more than a simple favor. It was a betrayal that stung far deeper than any misunderstanding. "I need some time to think about this," he said, his voice strained. "I'll call you tomorrow, Sarah." With that, he hung up the phone. He sat there, in the silence of his kitchen, trying to process the emotions that had just been thrown at him. Betrayal, anger, sadness, but above all, confusion. How had things come to this? The next day, David sat in his study, the weight of Sarah's request lingering in the air. He had always prided himself on being a fair and understanding father, but this situation was different. The more he thought about it, the more it gnawed at him. The cabin wasn't just a building to him, it was a symbol. It represented years of hard work, memories of family vacations, and moments of peace and reflection. It was his sanctuary, his place of solace, and now his daughter wanted to take it. Not just take it, but take it for a honeymoon, after secretly marrying without telling him. David's mind raced with conflicting thoughts. On one hand, he knew Sarah. He knew how important this was to her. She had always dreamed of a perfect life with a man she loved. But on the other hand, the secrecy, the lack of communication, it felt like a slap in the face. Why had she not trusted him with such a significant part of her life? The more he thought about it, the more he felt betrayed, not just by her actions, but by the way she had handled everything. As the afternoon sun filtered through the windows, David walked to the cabin. The path leading up to it was overgrown with ivy, the steps worn from years of use. This was his place. His escape. The cabin, perched on the edge of a small mountain lake, had been his refuge from the chaos of life. It had been there when he had lost his job, when he had gone through his divorce, when his friends turned their backs on him. The cabin had never let him down. He sat on the porch, staring out at the tranquil waters, and wondered if he was making too much of this. After all, it was just a house. A physical structure. Was he being too possessive? Too emotional? The thought of his daughter starting a new chapter in her life was, on some level, a cause for celebration. But it still stung that she hadn't invited him to be part of that chapter. And now, to ask him for something so personal. David sighed deeply. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, but he also couldn't deny the love he had for his daughter. She was his flesh and blood. And at the end of the day, wasn't that what mattered most? Family. He stared out over the lake, hoping for some clarity, but all he found was a quiet, uneasy peace. That night, David made his decision. He would call Sarah. He wasn't sure what he would say, but he knew he had to address this silent, growing rift between them. He dialed her number, and as the phone rang, he could feel the familiar pang of anxiety creep up his spine. The last thing he wanted was to make this worse, but he couldn't pretend that everything was okay. "Hello." Sarah's voice came through the line, and he could hear the faint sound of her husband in the background, laughter mixed with soft voices. She was happy, and he couldn't help but feel a flicker of resentment. It wasn't that he didn't want her to be happy, it was the way everything had unfolded that stung. "Sarah, it's Dad," David began, trying to keep his voice steady. "I've thought about your request. And I'm going to be honest with you. It's not an easy thing for me to just give up. The cabin means a lot to me. It's not just a place, it's my sanctuary, something I've worked for. I can't just hand it over because you've asked." There was a long silence on the other end of the phone, and David could feel the tension building. He didn't want to sound harsh, but the words were coming out anyway, sharp and without the filter of careful thought. "I understand," Sarah said quietly, her voice soft but with a hint of frustration. "But, Dad, I don't know what you want me to say. We need this. It's not just a favor, this is something we're counting on." David felt his stomach twist. He didn't want to argue with her, but the more she spoke, the more he realized that his daughter didn't truly understand what she was asking for. She saw the cabin as just another thing she could take, as if it were simply an asset to be used. He had never thought of it that way. To him, it was a part of who he was. It was more than just wood and stone. It was the essence of everything he had worked for. "I don't know if you do understand, Sarah," David replied, his voice softer now, but still firm. "This is more than just a building. It's something that has been in the family for years, and I can't just let it go. You're asking me for something that means everything to me." "I didn't think it would be such a big deal," Sarah said, her tone changing now. She wasn't pleading anymore, but instead sounding more frustrated, as though she couldn't understand why he wasn't more willing to help. "We're just asking to use it for a little while. It's not like I'm taking it forever. You've said yourself you were going to give it to us one day. Why not now?" The words stung, and David felt his anger rise once again. It wasn't the fact that she wanted to use the cabin. It was the way she assumed that she could, as if it were her right. The entitlement. The lack of understanding of the history, the emotional value that went beyond any material possession. "You don't understand," David said quietly, almost to himself. "This isn't just something to use. It's my piece. My history. You can't just take it and expect me to be okay with it." He could hear Sarah's breathing on the other end, a long pause stretching out before she finally spoke again. "I don't want to fight with you, Dad," she said, her voice breaking slightly. I thought it would be different." David took a deep breath, trying to center himself. He didn't want to drive a wedge between them. He had already lost so much. And yet, this felt like the final straw. "I need some time to think about this," he said, his voice softer now, almost weary. "I'll let you know what I decide." And with that, the conversation ended. David hung up the phone, sitting in the silence of his living room, his mind racing. What had happened to the daughter he had raised? What had happened to the family they used to be? The following days were long and quiet. David spent most of his time at the cabin, trying to come to terms with everything that had happened. The place that had once given him peace now felt like a battleground, a symbol of all the things he had worked so hard for, and the things his family seemed to be willing to take without understanding their significance. David's mind wandered back to the years when Sarah was younger. He remembered the summer trips to the cabin, the laughter echoing through the trees as they fished, hiked, and spent lazy afternoons by the lake. It had been the foundation of their memories. He had shared everything with her there, the hard days and the good ones, the losses and the triumphs. And now, he felt as though that connection had been severed. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of his phone ringing. The caller ID flashed, Sarah, and for a moment he hesitated. What more could she possibly have to say? His hand shook slightly as he picked up the phone, the anger and confusion from their last conversation still fresh in his mind. "Dad." Sarah's voice came through, hesitant but soft. "Can we talk?" David closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the situation. He didn't know if he was ready to talk, but he knew he couldn't avoid it forever. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "I don't know what to say, Sarah," he replied, his voice weary. "I've been thinking about it, and I can't get past the way everything has unfolded. The wedding, the secrecy, and now this request. It feels like you don't understand how much that cabin means to me." "I do understand, Dad," Sarah said, her voice cracking slightly. "I do. I don't know how to explain it. I wanted to tell you about the wedding, but I was scared. I didn't know how you'd react, and now, I just feel like I've messed everything up." David's heart softened at the sound of her voice, at the guilt that was evident in every word. He knew his daughter better than anyone, and he knew she wasn't trying to hurt him. She was just lost, caught between her own desires and the expectations of her family. But that didn't make the situation any easier to bear. "Sarah, it's not about the wedding," David said slowly. "It's about the trust. You didn't think enough to involve me in something that huge, and then you want something from me that I've held on to for years. The cabin isn't just a piece of property, It's part of my soul. It's where I've found my peace after everything. And now, it feels like you're asking me to give it up for your honeymoon. And that stings." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and David could almost hear the wheels turning in his daughter's mind as she processed his words. "I didn't mean for it to feel like that," Sarah said, her voice quieter now. "I really didn't. I thought that you would want to help us, that it would be something special. But I guess I was wrong." David's heart broke a little. The sadness in her voice told him that she truly didn't understand the depth of his attachment to the cabin, and that realization hurt more than the request itself. He wanted to be angry, wanted to tell her how much she had hurt him, but he couldn't find the words. Instead, all he could do was sit in silence, trying to make sense of the mess they had found themselves in. "I need some time, Sarah," David finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't just make this decision on the spot. I need to think about what's best for both of us." "Dad, please," Sarah pleaded, the desperation in her voice rising. "I understand if you don't want to give us the cabin. I'll accept that. But please don't shut me out. Don't let this tear us apart." David felt the tears pricking at the corners of his eyes. He wanted nothing more than to fix things with his daughter, but the pain of betrayal was still too fresh. The rift between them was growing, and he didn't know how to bridge it. "I'm not shutting you out, Sarah," David replied softly. "I just need to figure out how to move forward. This isn't just about the cabin, it's about trust. About us." He could hear her sniffling on the other end, and it made his heart ache. He hated that his daughter was in pain. But he also hated that he was in pain, too. The tension between them had built up over time, and now it felt like an insurmountable wall. "I'm sorry, Dad," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "I just wanted to start my life with him, and I thought asking you for the cabin would be a way to do that. I didn't mean to hurt you." "I know, sweetheart," David said quietly, rubbing his temple. "I know you didn't. But I need some space. I need to think." "Okay," Sarah replied, her voice barely audible. "I love you, Dad. I really do. I'm sorry." David's throat tightened as he heard those words. He wanted to say something, to make everything better, but he couldn't. All he could do was sit there, feeling the distance between them grow wider with each passing second. "I'll call you when I'm ready to talk," he said softly before hanging up the phone. For the rest of the night, David sat in silence. The cabin, the very place that had once been his sanctuary, now felt like a reminder of everything that was slipping through his fingers. His relationship with Sarah was at a breaking point, and there didn't seem to be any way to fix it. The words that had been left unsaid hung heavy in the air. He couldn't deny the hurt he felt, but he also couldn't deny the love he still had for his daughter. He stared out at the lake, the moonlight dancing on the water's surface, and wondered if they could ever find their way back to the family they had once been. Days turned into weeks, and the tension between David and Sarah only grew. Each time David thought about calling her, his mind filled with doubts and unresolved feelings. He couldn't shake the sense of betrayal, but he also couldn't ignore the love he had for her. She was his daughter, the same girl he had raised with so much care and affection. The same girl who had once looked at him with awe and admiration. Now, she felt like a stranger. The cabin, once his peaceful refuge, now felt like an anchor weighing him down. It was meant to be a place of serenity, a sanctuary from the storm of life. But now, it represented everything that had gone wrong between them. The more David thought about Sarah's request, the more he realized that giving her the cabin would mean more than just a physical transaction. It would mean letting go of something he had clung to for so long. It was the final thread that tied him to his past, to his memories of a time when their family had been whole. David's mind was clouded with conflicting emotions, but one thing was clear: he couldn't keep holding on to everything. He couldn't let this fester any longer. He had to make a decision, for both their sakes. One afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, David made the call. His heart pounded in his chest as he dialed Sarah's number. She picked up on the third ring, her voice soft, almost hesitant. "Dad." "Sarah," David began, his voice thick with emotion, "I've thought long and hard about everything we've talked about. About the wedding. About the cabin. And I've come to a decision." Sarah was quiet on the other end, and David could almost feel the tension hanging in the air. He took a deep breath, fighting back the overwhelming wave of sadness that threatened to consume him. "I can't give you the cabin, Sarah," he said, his voice firm but full of regret. "It's not just about the property. It's about everything it represents, the memories, the family we once were. I've held on to it for so long because it was a part of me. It's the last piece of that life, and I can't just give it away." There was a long pause before Sarah spoke, her voice barely audible. "I understand, Dad," she whispered. "I really do. I shouldn't have asked. I'm sorry." David felt a lump form in his throat. He hadn't expected her to react like this. He had anticipated anger or frustration, but instead she sounded defeated. It tore at his heart. He never wanted to hurt her, he just wanted her to understand. "You don't have to apologize, sweetheart," David replied, his voice softening. "You didn't know. And I didn't know how to handle all of this either. But it's not just about the cabin. It's about us, about me being there for you, and you being there for me. I wish we had been honest with each other from the start." Sarah was quiet again, and David could hear the tears in her voice when she finally spoke. "I just wanted to make it right, Dad," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought the cabin would be a way for us to reconnect, to start fresh. I wanted to make up for everything I've done, but I don't know how." David's heart ached as he heard the pain in her voice. He wanted to reach through the phone and hold her, to tell her everything would be okay. But the truth was, it wasn't just about the cabin. It was about rebuilding trust. It was about understanding each other again. "I know you do, Sarah," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "But sometimes, things just can't go back to the way they were. We have to figure out how to move forward from here." He paused, allowing the silence to fill the space between them. It wasn't a resolution. It wasn't the happy ending they had once envisioned. But it was a step toward healing. "I'm still here for you, Sarah," David added quietly. "Even if things aren't perfect, I'm still your dad." "I know, Dad," Sarah replied softly. "I love you." "I love you too, sweetheart," David whispered. "We'll figure this out. One day at a time." The call ended, and David sat in silence. The weight of his decision settled in. He had let go of something precious, but in doing so, he had taken the first step toward healing. The cabin would always be a part of him, but he couldn't let it stand between him and his daughter any longer. He stared out at the lake, watching the last traces of daylight fade into the horizon. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of calm. There was still a long way to go, but maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. If you found this story moving, make sure to subscribe to True Family Revenge Stories for more stories about family, forgiveness, and the emotional journeys that come with it. Join us as we continue to share real, heart-wrenching tales of love, loss, and everything in between.